Amen. I hope in this presentation to take some time and go back into the development of this message, but I'm also hoping to address a few loose ends that have come up along the way on the various presentations that I've heard. So I don't know how far we'll get, but thankfully, through the graciousness of Tyler, I've been given a couple extra speaking slots, so I might get my material done here over these next couple days. We're addressing a lot of things. The role of Russia in Bible prophecy has been opened up now that the Lord has removed his hand from Daniel 11, verse 10. And some of the questions that come up about this application, because immediately the brethren that are accomplishing the Omega movement, immediately, it was amazing. Within a couple days of hearing, well, we heard this message, Tabo and I, on a Saturday night. I asked the brethren that had put the initial part of this message together if they minded if I shared it in Holland the next Sabbath, and they said they didn't mind. Before we got to Holland, there was already a paper circulating in the United Kingdom saying the king of the South is not Russia. Okay, so this issue was important enough for Satan to be opposing it right from before it even gets off the ground. And so there's agitation along that line, and I think back, this is the end of this movement in terms of the message. So if you go back to the beginning, you find controversies that have been raised from 1989 onward in the development of this message, that they're being repeated here at the end, if you're familiar with what those controversies were. And one of them that we had to resolve initially was a question about, dealing with Daniel 11:40 to 45, you guys are saying that the king of the South was the Soviet Union and that the communism's been swept away, because that's pretty much what we understood and were teaching. And people would say, well, China's still communist and it's still in the world. But why are you saying the king of the South is gone when you got communist China there? And the way that was resolved, and now it needs to be put in the record here again, is that if you go into the writings of Ellen White and you type in the word Christendom, and then you go into a dictionary or a encyclopedia and you look up Christendom, Christendom is a term that has a very specific geographical location, and it's Europe and the Americas. And when you look at Sister White's commentary on Christendom, you'll see that she's defining that end-time Bible prophecy is to be applied in Christendom. Okay, the same way that Old Testament prophecy was applied in the Middle East. Okay, so Old Testament prophecy, it takes place in Palestine and Egypt and Syria and Babylon, but end-time Bible prophecy takes place in Christendom. So in the beginning of this message, when we were dealing with the sweeping away of the king of the South in 1989, we had to deal with this argument because this message was fought all the way through. And that question was resolved with understanding Christendom. So too now. The question is, well, you're saying that the king of the South was still there and you didn't see it. Russia was still alive and well, but what about China? And it looks like maybe the underdog that's about ready to strike the United States isn't Russia, it's North Korea. Okay? And those people that are giving that kind of input, I go back to the very beginning and say, hey, China and North Korea is not Christendom. And then there's a secondary argument to this, that Russia isn't truly communist. Okay, now a couple things. I'm not the political expert that some of you are, but I want to put in place a teaching that we've had in this prophetic message for a long time, and it addresses that subject too, and it's this. That at one level, Dwayne started this morning with a quote that says, that concluded, the last sentence was, the last scenes clearly revealed relate to the movements of the man of sin. Okay? So it's saying end-time Bible prophecy is focusing on the papacy. But the papacy at the end of the world is a threefold union. So the focus of Bible prophecy at one level is the beast, the dragon, and the false prophet. Daniel 11, verse 40, you can see all three of them. You have the king of the north, the beast. You have its ally, the chariot, ships, and horsemen. That's the false prophet. You got the dragon power. That's the king of the south. Verse 40, you see all three of them. Verse 41, you see all three of them. It's the story of how these three entities, the beast, dragon, and false prophet, lead the world to come to the point where the papacy comes to its end between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. And geographical, if you map out between the seas and the glorious holy mountain in the Middle East, and you put a mark where that is, it's at the valley of Megiddo, okay, which is John's Armageddon. These three powers lead the world to Armageddon. So there's a quote where Sister White says, we should study out the mystery of iniquity that has such a large part in the end time events. Okay, if you type in study out mystery of iniquity, you'll see that quote that I'm doing a terrible job paraphrasing. So we're supposed to study these things out. So when it comes to the beast, the dragon, and the false prophet, each of them have a religious and a civil aspect. Okay, this is the papacy, the beast. Its religion is Catholicism. Its civil manifestation is a monarchy. Okay, the Pope is your classic kingly power. The false prophet, the United States, it's always Protestantism, even when it turns into apostate Protestantism. And it's a republic, even when it turns into a democracy. A republic and a democracy are kind of two different things. But when it comes to the dragon, and this is the point I'm trying to get to, the religious manifestation of the dragon is many things. It's Hinduism, it's Buddhism, it's spiritualism, it's New Ageism, it's all these various religions that you can classify under spiritualism. But it's still the dragon. The dragon, when you see these three powers listed repeatedly in the scriptures, the threefold enemy, two of them are singular, and one of them is plural, and it's the same way with the dragon power's civil manifestation. Okay, the dragon power is Nazism, it's socialism, it's communism, it's various manifestations that are pretty much the same thing. So now the argument about Russia is that it's not really communist, okay? And I'm not a political expert, but I have been looking at the French Revolution here recently. And if you haven't looked at it, one of the things that you will find if you look at it is that in the French Revolution, this is the first time communism becomes a government in the history of the world, so to speak, as the king of the South at least. And in the French Revolution, there was a minimum of three different type of communist parties, okay? The weakest was a communist party that believed that would believe pantheism. Part of its communist philosophy was that God was in the flowers and the trees and the mountains, and it gets wiped out real fast in the French Revolution. But the guy that did the most of the dirty work in the Reign of Terror, and I won't say his name correctly, but it's Robespierre, it's close facsimile, okay? He was a communist, but he had a God. He believed in an unknown supreme being, all-knowing, but really not concerned with mankind so much. But his communism included a God. But there was another communist party in that history that thought God was in everything. And then there were the purists. There was a communist party that didn't have anything to do with God. It was simply that they were the purists. They liked the system of the party, of the republic, a communist Republican party. So there was at least three types of communism. So what I'm saying is, I don't think it's valid to say that Russia isn't communist, okay? Putin praises the political process of communism. But even if they're not fulfilling communism, this book here, which we used for years before we thought that it would have any relevance at this time period, it's written by Anatoly Golitsyn, okay? I used to use this 15 years ago, and the pages I would turn to are marked by these little things. Okay, this guy here that wrote this book was a former KGB officer, and the first half of the book, he shows that the KGB, of whom Putin is a KGB guy, they're trained in the book called The Art of War, supposedly an ancient Chinese book on how to accomplish warfare. Some people say it really wasn't ancient Chinese, that it was actually written by the Jesuits and inserted into history under that kind of guise. But in any case, the KGB operates, they get trained on that book. That's how they do their dirty work is based upon the philosophical principles in the art of war. Okay, and in the art of war, the way you defeat an enemy is you get close to him. You become his friend, and then when he's not looking, you cut his throat. Okay, that's one of the premier principles in the art of war. That's what the KGB operates on. So the first part of this book, he spends time showing you that is how the KGB trains its operatives. And then the last part of the book, he's saying that the plan of Communist Russia and the KGB was, in agreement with the art of war, to collapse the Soviet Union and take a stance in the world to where they draw close to the world and relate to the world as if they're just another nation in the world that's trying to move forward in the progress of mankind. And this book says the plan was, once the Western world gets its guard dropped, then they're going to strike. Okay, so I'm not prepared yet to receive these arguments saying that Russia isn't communist, because that may be so, but they may have purposely dropped that rhetoric in agreement with. And by the way, the people that endorse this guy are well-known, not that it matters, the well-known diplomats from the United States. Okay, so this was I would imagine if you were going to take a course in what do they call it if you're studying to be a politician in the university? Political science. This might be a book that they had you read. But in any case,
So they're a Trojan horse.
Trojan horse, that's part of the art of war. Now, I was going to jump up here and use Brother Tabot's work and add just a couple thoughts to it, but it got erased, okay? It's not a problem. And I took off to catch up on some emails, so I didn't hear. The only one I haven't heard so far was Brother Timothy's presentation. And I'm sure that it was. So I want to add just a thought or two to what Brother Tabot said, and I told him about it after his meeting. It's not that he and I are in disagreement in this. He's just saying it differently than I would say it, and maybe the way he says it is better. But I think it misses one element, okay? And what I mean by that, he was saying the image of the beast, he may not be said it this way, but he's leading us to believe the image of the beast is set up here at the midnight cry. And I don't think that's accurate, okay? And the reason I'm saying I don't think it's accurate to state it that way is the image of the beast is something that develops over a period of time. It begins here, but it gets set up over this period of time. And I think it's important enough of a point about the image of the beast to make sure that we're clear on that, because here at the first Sunday law, you've got the evidence that there's going to be a progression of Sunday laws that leads to this Sunday law. So we have the first Sunday law here, but it's a progressive escalation of Sunday laws. And this is the progression of the Protestants of the United States getting more firmly in control of the civil government till they get to the point to where they can pass the Sunday law. And as he was saying, the Constitution is overturned here. In reality, the Constitution's fully overturned here, but this is the first strike against the Constitution. And in this history, constitutions gets repeatedly destroyed more and more until it's gone here. That's part of the progression of this history. Sister White has a statement where she says, every principle of the Constitution will be repudiated. It's getting repudiated in this history. Okay, so if you get on the internet to try to confirm what I'm going to tell you here, and this is what I asked Brother Timothy about, which he didn't do because I've had more than one person go on the internet to try to confirm what I'm saying, and I'm telling you, if you go on the internet, you can confirm what I'm going to say, but you've got to be a careful looker, okay? And here's what I'm going to say. And I'm switching gears on you, but I have a reason to do it. Who was the first president? No, George Washington was not the first president, okay? There were 7 presidents, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, of the Constitutional Convention. And the Constitutional Convention came together to write the Constitution. And when they came together in a meeting, they didn't select a chairman, or they didn't elect an executive officer. The title that they put on it is a president, okay? And they had 7 of them till they reached this point here where the first Constitution is introduced, and it's called the Articles of Confederation. Now, if you count this 7th president, this is one of the tricks. If you go on the internet, I'm going to tell you at one level there's 17 presidents before George Washington, who is the first president. Because once you have the Articles of Confederation, you're going to have 10 presidents, and then you're going to get to the Constitution where George Washington becomes the first president. But there's a trick to this, and the trick is this. This 7th president, his name was, sometimes I'll remember it, Huntington, okay? He's a president before they've written the Articles of Confederation, but he's still serving as president when they have written the Articles of Confederation. So he's the 7th president when they don't have a constitution, because this is the first constitution. Huntington. And he's the first president when they do have a constitution. So I'm counting him twice, all right? And another thing you got to know is that in these 7 presidents, 2 of them are going to be presidents 2 times. One of them is going to be a president here, and then later on he's going to be a president here, and then John Hancock, the guy with the fancy signature on the Constitution, he's a president in these first 7, and he's a president in the next 10. So if you go on the internet and you say, show me the first 17 presidents, the internet's it can give you a lot of strange answers, because I'm counting number 7 twice. He's 7, and he's also the first, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th. And this brings you to 1789, the Constitution and George Washington. And I seen who's the first president, who's the richest president of all time, who got rich by real estate, and who it took the longest period of time to confirm his cabinet officers of any other president in history. None of the other ones are even close to how long it took George Washington to get his cabinet selections confirmed. The reason for it, it was a brand new government. They were practicing the implementation of the Constitution for the first time. But that leads you down here to number 45. Okay, he's the last president. He's the richest president. He got rich from real estate, and he's the only one that has exceeded George Washington on how long it takes to get your cabinet officers confirmed, okay? Because Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning. So if you go into the internet and you try to look for 17 presidents before George Washington, it would have to be 16, because I'm counting this guy twice. But then you got to know that 2 of them served twice, so it would be 14 total. But there were 16 administrations, but I'm prophetically counting number 7 as number 1, because with the United States, it's about the speaking, which Sister White says is an action of the legislative and judicial authorities This is where the Constitutional Convention comes together at the beginning. This is the legislative judicial authorities. This is the first Constitution. The United States speaks here. It speaks in the reign of this 7th and 8th king, president. 10 presidents later, you're at the first president. And what we're saying is, down here is number 45, that in this history here, the 45th, and I don't know, I'll just add this in. I'll add this in for a purpose. These guys that used to follow this message, that are so excited about prophecy that all they can do now is look at the midnight to the midnight cry, and they're going off into darkness. And they're refusing to consider the light that's coming out of Daniel 11, 1 through 39 now. If they would step back and look at the light that's coming out of it now, all their needs for the intellectual stimulation that you get from prophetic revelation would be met, because what's opening up with Daniel 11 now, it's the dirt brush man is throwing those jewels into the casket, and it's shining 10 times brighter than the sun. It's getting to that point right now. So Brother William's been doing some work on Pippenger here, all right? And one of them, those first 39 verses of Daniel 11, they were always hard for me. I've read them, I've studied them, but they couldn't click. And half the reason they couldn't click is I don't do well with grammar, is probably the way to say it. You know, so when you got Ptolemy here, and then Ptolemy here, and you got Seleucus here, and you got Seleucus there, Seleucus Nicodator, and Seleucus, you know, it just, all right, it beats me up. But one of the things that when it comes to this history, okay, verse 14, and also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision. Right here's where the vision's established, brothers and sisters. Rome establishes the vision, and our vision's established right here in our history, in between Raphia and Pippenger. And one of the things that's interesting that Brother Williams dug out is that leading up to Raphia, which is midnight, the two southern kings that lead up to it, the Ptolemies, the one is Ptolemy the fourth, and the next one is Ptolemy the fifth, and it's the same thing here after Raphia, only it's the Seleucus guys, if I'm pronouncing that right. After Pippenger, you have Seleucus the fourth, followed by Seleucus the fifth. So brothers and sisters, I want you to see that this history here, it's bookended by 45:45, telling us that in the history of the 45th president, this is where this takes place. Okay, it's just the kind of things that are coming out of this understanding are amazing, but I want you to see that this first president, George Washington, there's too many characteristics not to see that he doesn't typify Donald Trump. Okay, so Donald Trump, in this history here, as Brother Thibault was rightly telling us, the sixth kingdom of Bible prophecy is going down here, while the seventh kingdom of Bible prophecy, according to Revelation 17, is going up here. This is the history of the parallel kingdoms on several witnesses. Okay, this is where the two sticks are coming together. If you look at the end of ancient Israel and ancient Judah, or at the beginning of ancient Israel and ancient Judah, you'll see the two sticks being joined in here, two parallel kingdoms. And you have this in verse 4 of Daniel 11. So you have the sixth and seventh kingdom in this history, and you have the number 360 from the Battle of Actium to the Sunday Law. And as Brother Thibault pointed out, you have Daniel chapter 3, the image being set up in here. This is the image of the beast testing time, and the dimensions are 60 by 6. That's 360. That's the time of the Battle of Actium. And what's happening here, this is the first Sunday Law, and this is the Sunday Law, okay? That is the focus of Bible prophecy. This is where the United States speaks as a dragon. So what this is at one level, if you'll see it, this is the rising of the sun. Okay, maybe that's too metaphorical, but you get my point. Sunday Law starts here, and it's rising to noon here. You get it? So what is the symbol of the sun? The symbol of the sun that the pagans do, they'll always have these little... This is the Sunday progression in the United States. That's a bad illustration of a pagan sundial, isn't it? But you know what I mean by sundial? How many degrees is there? 360. Okay. You got lots of witnesses in here. This is where the Sunday issue is coming up. Okay. And so in this history, in this transition, this 45th president, right here is the threefold union. Sister White says it. You've got lots of references. Here is, and you all know it, this is where the United States stretches its hand across the gulf to clasp the hand with the Roman power. That's the false prophet grasping the hand with the beast. And it stretches its other arm across the abyss to take the hand of spiritualism. That's the dragon. And she identifies the threefold union right here. Okay? So here, Donald Trump, the 45th president of the United States, he's now transitioning to the head of these 10 kings. Because the beginning of this history, in these presidents, you have 7, 10, 1, 1, 10 kings, threefold union. 3 of those 10 come together to rule over the rest of them. 3 from 10 is 7. This is a prophetic chiasm, and it's airtight. Okay. But now, Brother Timothy, if I understood him right, he did deal with the French Revolution a little bit, right? So he pointed out, probably, that in 1789, that same year that we had our Constitution, that the Constitution is being introduced into France, that begins the French Revolution. And that Constitution in France was written by John Paul Lafayette primarily, who was a good friend with Thomas Jefferson, who was the primary author of our Constitution. So there's a historical connection there, not just with the dates, but very close connection. Okay, but by 1793, you have the arrival of the King of the South in history. Because in 1793, King Louis XVI loses his head to a communist government. And you know that that's a prophetic fulfillment because Sister White in the Great Controversy identifies that it was 258 years earlier. Did you put this on the board too? Okay, in the Great Controversy, Sister White identifies that 258 years before King Louis loses his head in 1793, on the very day of the year, January 21st, is anyone want to correct me? January 21st, 1793, King Louis loses his head right here by a communist government, first communist government in history, chops his head off, and it was exactly 258 years earlier that the first Protestant martyr was martyred in France on the same day of the year, 258 years earlier, January 21st, whatever that equates to, 1535. I might have added that wrong. And when he lost his head here in 1793, where he died was the identical piece of ground where this first Protestant martyr died in France. And Sister White identifies this in the Great Controversy. So this is a fulfillment of prophecy. Therefore, this is the birth of the King of the South. This is the first communist government. And from here, you're going to lead into Napoleon Bonaparte, who's going to go and give the deadly wound to the papacy in 1798. But we know that Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning. Therefore, here, when the King of the South first comes into history, you have a kingdom removed. King Louis' head is chopped off. Kingdom removed. You have a new manifestation of the dragon power. First time in history. You've got the King of the South. You have other things going on here. What is the other thing that you have going on in 1793 that every Seventh-day Adventist knows about? It's called the Reign of Terror. Okay, the Reign of Terror. Therefore, this being the beginning of the King of the South, when you understand that at Paneum, the midnight cry, that Russia, the King of the South, is defeated, then you're going to have the same characteristics repeated, because Jesus always illustrates the end from the beginning. You're going to have a kingdom removed. Russia is removed at this point. You're going to have a new manifestation of a satanic power. Let me introduce you to the United Nations. Testimonies to Ministers, page 38. Kings, governors, and rulers have taken upon themselves the brand of Antichrist and are represented as the dragon who goes to make war with the saints. The United Nations is being introduced here right at the end of the King of the South. And so what's going to happen right here? The Reign of Terror. Okay, so when we're talking about the image of the beast being set up here, and we're talking about the Constitution being overturned here, I'm pretty sure that this is progressive, but Sister White says a couple things. She says active despotism is going to come to this land. And if you look up the definition of despotism, it means a dictatorship or military rule. Military, what do they call it? Martial law, okay? So in this history, the Reign of Terror, this is where the active despotism is going to return. This is where a dictatorship is going to come into the United States. This is going to be overturning the Constitution. The Constitution was written to prevent from kingly rule and from religious rule. A dictatorship is kingly rule. It's coming back in here. Okay, so Sister White also says there's going to be another civil war. And she says it's over economics, but she also says it's over race. Okay? So here at the Sunday Law, the United States is gone. National apostasy is followed by national ruin. It's no longer the kingdom of Bible prophecy. It's past tense. Now you got the seventh kingdom, the 10 kings, who immediately agree to give their kingdom unto the eighth in Revelation 17. So the civil war that's coming, brothers and sisters, it's coming right here in this history. So because we know that Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning, and we have the justification to see that prophecy is being specific about the president that is reigning in the United States at the end of the world, I mean, come on, you can't think that it's just a coincidence that all these characteristics of George Washington are repeated down here with Trump. We can't believe that, can we? This is prophecy. So you can look at Trump as a fulfillment of prophecy, and one of the things that Trump is he's a Republican. So who was the first Republican president? Abraham Lincoln. Okay, so was Abraham Lincoln ruling when there was a civil war? Okay, Sister White says there's going to be a civil war right here in this history. 45th President of the United States. And in 1863, in the dead center of the Civil War, we already know that that's a prophetic waymark for many reasons, right? That's the end of the chiasm of the 2520. There's so many things that's going on in 1863 in Adventism. We don't question it. That's a prophetic waymark. But the center of the Civil War, if we're talking about Abraham Lincoln, is 1863. And what does he do in 1863? He proclaims the Emancipation Proclamation that sets the slaves free. So when this president here, that's been typified also by Abraham Lincoln, is in this history when slavery is going to be repeated, the Emancipation Proclamation is typifying when that gets thrown away at the end also. You see my point? Now in this history, we know that the United States, and in Daniel 2, Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, "Thou, O king, are the head of gold." So we know that a king and a kingdom in Bible prophecy are interchangeable. So we've got a little bit of leeway when we're talking about Trump. Are we talking about Trump or are we talking about the United States? Because if Abraham Lincoln typifies Trump, Abraham Lincoln got assassinated. Okay, but we know that the United States gets assassinated in this history by the Roman Church when they come in and conquer it. So you can go either way with that, but it's worth considering. Okay, so what I'm saying, the troublous times that are the backdrop for the implementation, the setting up of the image of the beast, they're all getting brought into focus from Daniel 11, verses 1 to 39. It's opening up light here that tells us just what's ahead. And this is the image of the beast test, is it not? The image of the beast test in the United States. And this is the quote that the brother misrepresented last night, where Sister White says, "The Lord has shown me clearly that the image of the beast will be formed before probation closes." Probation closes for Adventists right here. The image of the beast will be formed before probation closes, for it is the great test of the people of God by which their eternal destiny will be decided. This is the test they must pass before they're sealed. When are we sealed? We're sealed at the Sunday law. There's a test that comes before the Sunday law. Our probation closes where we're sealed. This test is the formation of the image of the beast. Okay, so, but here, this is last call for 11th hour workers. This is last call for Levites. Okay, and we know there's an image of the beast test in Revelation 13, verse 14 and onward. The United States goes out to the world and forces them to set up an image of the beast. So there has to be an image of the beast test in here, right? That is going to challenge the Levites, so to speak, to call the Levites out. And that's what we're seeing here at midnight. Okay, Adventist Church going to reach out to the government of the United States. The definition of the image of the beast is when secular power is used to enforce religious dogma. Okay, so you got an image of the beast test that begins here that's a warning, that leads to this one that's a warning, that leads to this one that is a warning. But what I'm telling you is for us in here, we're already having an image of the beast test. And you can mark it whenever you want. You can mark it, I'm not sure which way to mark it, November 8th, 2016, or January 20th, 2017. But brothers and sisters, by the definition of what the image of the beast is in the United States, Sister White's clear that when apostate Protestantism has the power to take control of the government of the United States, that's when she's in position to start pushing her dogmas. And in the last election, the work of taking control of the government of the United States was finalized by apostate Protestantism. Okay, it doesn't matter about this Supreme Court judge that they're dealing with now. The Catholic Church has been in control of the Supreme Court for a long time. Okay, you just back away, forget whether they're conservative or liberal, go look what religion they are, and don't forget that the members of the Catholic Church are signed to an agreement that when it comes down to the bottom line, your loyalty is with the Catholic Church above any government. Okay, that's part of Catholicism. So to the Pope, so they've had the Supreme Court for a long time. They did not have the executive branch until Trump got in there. And they didn't have the Senate until this last election. But brothers and sisters, at this last election, the Republican Party that is under the influence of apostate Protestantism, it owns every branch of government. They're in the position now where they can move forward with their agenda. And you and I, as called to be priests, are required to recognize that this is the first step, one of the first steps in the image of the beast time period. And if we're not seeing that, then we're going to come up to midnight and be on the wrong side of the issue. Okay, so anyway, I wanted to catch up on those things. And now a time check. I got what? 20 minutes. Okay, what I was saying this morning, for those of you that weren't here, is that probably part of my militancy about what I've been seeing going on in this movement was based upon the fact that the first thing I started studying was the reform lines before we came to Daniel 11:40-45, and I immediately came under conviction that in order to describe the reform lines intelligently for people to understand them, you had to teach them why you're setting prophecy on the line, and then you had to teach them what the waymarks are. And by definition. And in this book, you can see right from the start we were doing that. And you can see in this first set of notes that was ever used publicly to teach the reform lines that we also put in place the fact that the spirit of prophecy and the Bible both teach repeatedly that our responsibility at the end of the world is to guard the waymarks because they will come under attack, and to guard the foundations because they're going to come under attack. So when it comes to the reform lines where the foundation is illustrated and the different waymarks are illustrated on the line, if you don't know it, your responsibility is to know exactly what those waymarks are and exactly what the foundation is, because you've been told repeatedly by inspiration they will be attacked. And not only will they be attacked, we have been informed that in the Omega apostasy, that will be the special attack. Okay, so I didn't get to the board this morning. I had something written on the board and I never made it over there. But what I had written there, just to remind us of this point, and then I want to just go through some scriptures and some past history as the Sabbath draws nigh. So this morning I had something like this. This being the foundations. Okay, this being the empowerment of the first message when the divine symbol comes down, second message, third message at the very basic level. And if you remember this morning, I had over here Noah, Moses, pardon me? Cyrus. And it doesn't, I don't need them all. It's just, this is what I had, and I'll put Miller and be done. In every one of the reform lines, every one of them, and all you need, brothers and sisters, is 2 or 3 to establish it. In every reform line, time of the end, there's an increase of knowledge. The message will get formalized. As the message moves through history, it reaches a point where a divine symbol comes down and that message is empowered. Now it's going to test. Now, when it was formalized, it was put into an understanding so that the Holy Spirit can hold you and I accountable for receiving or rejecting that message, because we're going to be tested on it when it gets empowered. Okay? But when that divine symbol comes down, you're going to see the foundation laid every single time. Okay? The 3 steps over here is where the door closes. And our first reference to the door closing is Noah. Okay? But you know, we lived, our first 19 years in Adventism was out in the Mojave Desert. I mean, the real desert. When we wanted to just have a nice day out in nature on Sabbath, we would get up early in the morning and ditch out on church, and we could drive 45 minutes, 50 minutes, and be in Death Valley. And if it's the winter time, if you haven't ever been in Death Valley is really nice in the winter time. Okay, we were in the desert, okay, of California. And why was I telling you that? There's a reason I was telling you that. And it's, pardon me? The door closes. Oh, okay, yeah, I remember. There was a brother there. He was one of the engineers on the base. And those engineers on the base were well paid, so they had a lot of money. And he had a house out on the base. And what do you suppose he was doing in his backyard? He was building a big sailboat. Okay, he was building a big sailboat. And he got laid to rest long before he ever got that sailboat out of his backyard, but that's what he wanted to do, is build a sailboat. And what I learned, and what you already knew, and I probably knew it before that, is when you're going to build a boat, you build a foundation to build that boat on. In order to you put a template together to build a boat on. Noah had to build a foundation to start his work. Okay, it's not specifically identified in the scriptures, but it doesn't have to be identified in the scriptures, because you're going to have enough witnesses that there has to be a foundational work here that you can back up in here and know what it takes to build a boat, and you can see it there. With Moses, he comes out of the wilderness, and he's circumcised. He's ready to take his message to Egypt, and his message is, I want to take God's people out 3 days to do worship. But his first message, his foundational message about taking the children of Israel out to worship, is Sabbath observance. It's Sabbath. And this is what causes the shaking right from the start. The foundational work of Moses was informing the Jews who had ceased to keep the Sabbath in their bondage and slavery in Egypt. There was a Sabbath reform and revival as the foundational work of Moses right here, right after the angel comes down and confronts him with circumcision. With Cyrus, you got Cyrus, Darius, Artaxerxes. Cyrus, the Bible says, he's the one that's going to say, lay the foundation. And it's in the history of the first decree that the foundation is laid. And it's in the history of the second decree that the temple is completed. And it's in the history after the third decree where the streets and walls are finished in troublous times. But that's where the foundation was laid. And as Brother Dwayne started this morning, there's no other foundation that can be laid than Christ. Okay, all these are typifying Christ one way or another. And in the time of Christ, we know that at his baptism, he took 2 disciples of John and 3 new disciples. He had 5 disciples that Sister White mentions right in this baptismal history, and she calls them the foundation of the Christian church, those first 5 wise disciples. Okay. In the time of Miller's 1798, increase of knowledge. Miller formalizes the message, 1831. The message is this here, brothers and sisters, this is the work of William Miller, okay? And he's did this work back in this history, and it's going to be put on a chart in May of 1842, and it represents the foundations of the Millerite movement, right there, okay? So this angel here comes down on August 11th, 1840. The chart is produced in May of 1842, and it immediately begins to test the Protestants, and they're going to close their door April 19th, 1844. But my point is all of these witnesses here are pointing to the perfect fulfillment of an angel or divine symbol coming down, which is Revelation 18. At 9/11, the divine symbol comes down, and through the Lord's providence, we're forced to start coming to grips with the Millerite, the foundational understanding of Islam. Because Islam has just come into history. What does that mean? And the only way that you can wrap your mind around the third woe is to go back to the pioneer understanding. And I've heard the pioneer understanding, I've heard it said here in these meetings, a concept that is a contradiction to the pioneer understanding of Islam. Just that's the most friendly way to say it. But in order to understand Islam at 9/11, you got to go back to the foundations, and you got to find that up on 2 witnesses, this sacred chart and this sacred chart, that the pioneers taught that the first woe was Islam and the second woe was Islam. First woe was Islam, second woe is Islam, therefore the third woe is Islam. Okay, so what I want you to understand is that the Protestant understanding of Islam is that it's a tool of Rome. And that's a contradiction of the pioneer understanding of Islam. Pioneers believed correctly that Islam is raised up to chastise the apostate Roman church. Okay, the pioneer understanding is Islam is a tool against Rome, not a tool that is used by Rome. But the Protestant world has promoted the idea that Islam is a tool of Rome. And this, of course, because we've accepted Protestant methodology back in the 1950s, this is widespread in Adventism. And it even found its way into here. So I'm at least acknowledging, if you're holding to that idea that at the end of the world, Islam is a tool of Rome, that's a contradiction of the foundations. Okay, but in 9/11, we got to understand what the third woe is. So we got to go back to the foundational understanding. And the Lord, brothers and sisters, the Lord, he had to put these ideas in place. Okay, he had to have an argument in Daniel 11 about the glorious land. Okay, the argument in Daniel 11 about the glorious land is, oh, Brother Pippenger, he's saying the glorious land is the United States, and he's wrong, because we all know, and we're all the theologians, and we're all the self-supporting leaders, we all know the glorious land in Bible prophecy is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So we have an argument about that goes on for years. In fact, it was because of that argument that Brother Dwayne gets excited one day because he's reading an article by Hiram Edson, where Hiram Edson says the glorious land is the United States. And he's wanting to call me and say, hey, I found a pioneer that agrees with you that the glorious land is the United States. And it just happens to be that in those articles, Hiram Edson's talking about the 25-20. Okay, so we're having an argument in this movement about what the glorious land is. And because of that heightened interest, Dwayne comes across the pioneer that agrees with our side of the issue on the glorious land, but what's really happening is the Lord's leading him to relook at this right here, okay? And they're good articles, I'm sure you've read them, but it was all providential. But before you got there, the argument over the glorious land, the knockout punch for me, because I was the main guy out there taking the hits from these guys, was that when pagan Rome takes control of the world, it has to conquer 3 geographical areas: the east, the south, the pleasant land. And when papal Rome takes control of the world, it has to conquer 3 geographical areas: the Heruli, the Ostrogoths, and the Vandals. So when modern Rome is being illustrated in the last 6 verses of Daniel 11, and you have the king of the south, the glorious land in Egypt, it's got to be geographical areas based upon 2 witnesses. It can't be a spiritual entity. It can't be the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's got to be a geographical area. And the United States is a geographical area. So this argument has put in place the triple application of prophecy. That's where it came from. It was from an argument over the glorious land. So when we get to 9/11, we've already been trained in the triple application of prophecy. And the triple application of prophecy is based upon a rule that all of you use in here on a regular basis. Upon the testimony of 2 or 3, a thing is established. So when you see that there's 3 woes, the first woe is Islam, the second woe is Islam, what's the third woe going to be? Islam. But that's the very basic. If you go into the characteristics of the first woe, and you combine them with the characteristics of the second woe, they give you the characteristics of the third woe. And that's really profound. But I want you to see something. You can't understand the triple application of prophecy without the introduction of a little bit of math. Okay, if you're not seeing that the first and the second add up to the third, you're missing the math component. Upon the testimony of 2, a thing is established. Upon the testimony of the first woe and the second woe, a thing is established. So you got the math there, right? And who is it that creates the math? It's Palmoni. Okay, so at this point, the Lord is leading us into an understanding about the work of Christ, not simply as the Lion of the tribe of Judah that unseals the book, but he's starting to introduce us to the work of Christ as the wonderful numberer is one definition for Palmoni, or the number of secrets. And you all know this, right? Now we just take it for granted. We know who Palmoni is. But this was a process that the Lord led us through. And he led us through the triple application of prophecy. And you couldn't have had that triple application of prophecy if he hadn't already introduced you to a little bit of Palmoni. All right? You following me? Because I want you to follow me, because when you get here to Panium, one of the things about Panium, it's not just about the battle between the United States and Russia. It's about the god Pan and the Pantheon Temple in Daniel 8:11 and the pantheism of John Harvey Kellogg. Okay, and it's about, what's it called? What's that sequence? The divine sequence, is it called? No, not Fibonacci is a close facsimile. The golden ratio. Everyone knows the golden ratio, right? Okay, you got to know the golden ratio. Now, Sister Jackie, you're shaking your head no, and you should know. Because the golden ratio everyone that's in the medical field should know about it. Our body is based upon the golden ratio, as is the planets that are circling the sun. Okay, and there's a ratio, and it works like this. 0, 1, the next element in this ratio as it goes out is going to be based upon these 2 being combined. So 0 plus 1 is So what's going to be the next one? 2. What will be the next one? What will be the next one? 8. 13. And it goes on. And this ratio is demonstrated in the rotation of the planets around the sun. It's part of it's the ratio that makes up our fingers. It's the ratio that makes up the arrangement of a sunflower seed. It's the ratio that's used in the musical scale. It's one of the signs of Palmoni, the wonderful number, okay? And so where do we see Palmoni? Where do we see Palmoni? You see him in Daniel 8:13. Don't you? That's where he's marked. And the books of Daniel and Revelation are the same books. So where do you see whoa, whoa, whoa in the book of Revelation? Revelation 8:13. Palmoni's got his fingerprints on both of those passages in Daniel and Revelation. You have to have the math to make it work. Okay, so when we're talking about Paneum, and I only have a couple minutes, and I never got at all to where I wanted to go. This is being Paneum, and I got 5 minutes. Paneum is later called Caesarea Philippi. Okay, and Christ is in Caesarea Philippi at the point in time where Jesus makes the Christian confession, and that's what the theologians call it. When Jesus says to the disciples, "Who do men say that I am?" And they give the answer, and he says, "But who do you say that I am?" Sister White tells us that the reason that Peter was allowed to give the Christian confession, that is the name of his statement. Thou art, how's it go? Thou art Christ, the Son of the living God. Okay, that's the Christian confession. That is the confession that identifies that you are part of the Christian church. And that's what's being discussed there, brothers and sisters, because Jesus says to Peter, thou art, let's read it. Let's go to Matthew 18. 16. In verse 13, it says, when Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, and brothers and sisters, that's Paneum. That's where the Battle of Paneum is. And how many of you know the difference between Zion and Sion? Do you think they're the same and they're just translated a little bit different? Is that what you think? That's what most people think. Okay, but they're two different places. Zion is Jerusalem, and Sion is in the Hermon Mountains, well north of Jerusalem. Okay? And it's there in the Hermon Mountains where you have the fountains of Pan. And the fountains of Pan is a spring that feeds the Jordan River from the Hermon Mountains. Okay, but the fountains of Pan, it comes from pretty much a bottomless pit, hundreds of feet deep. And this bottomless pit that is the fountains of Pan that bubbles up, it comes out of a cave. And in front of this cave was built a temple to the god Pan, the temple of Pan. Okay, but Caesar has given Philip the Tetrarch this province to rule over. So Philip the Tetrarch, to return the praise to Caesar, he also builds a temple there to Caesar. So at this place in the Hermon Mountains, which is Sion, which is Paneum, where this battle is going to take place, you have two temples. You've got the temple of Pan, and you've got the temple of Caesar. You've got a religious temple and a civil temple. You've got church and state. And Jesus is there with the disciples, and you got to get this. What do you suppose the name the temple of Pan goes by? What's it called? It's not called the temple of Pan. It's called the gates of hell. So when Jesus says to Peter, When Jesus, verse 13, came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" And they said, "Some say that thou art John the Baptist, some Elias, and others Jeremiah, and one of the prophets." He saith unto them, "But whom say ye that I am?" And Simon Peter answered and said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." All the theologians, Protestants, down through history, this is the Christian confession. And I'm making this point because, brothers and sisters, we understand that this is Paneum, the Battle of Paneum. This is the midnight cry. This is where the church triumphant is placed. Okay, so this is Caesarea Philippi. And this is the story about the raising up of the church triumphant that's being typified right here by Peter's interaction with Christ. Right in front of the Pan Temple. Well, I don't know if it's right in front. I'm getting a little bit too free with my thoughts, but it's in Paneum, okay? It's got to be close. It's got to be close. And I'm getting louder, not to add emotion to this, but because the rain is coming down hard, all right? So in verse 15 it says, "And Jesus answered and said unto him, Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah." Simon means hearing, Bar means son of, Jonah means Jonah. And Sister White says the reason that Peter was allowed to be the disciple that made this confession is because he was the first to recognize that Christ was the anointed one, that Christ was the Christ, that Christ was the Messiah. He was the first to see it. So he was given the privilege of expressing the truth upon which the Christian church and the church triumphant is founded upon. Okay? And it's the incarnation. Thou art Christ and the Son of the living God. Okay? But notice this. Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, the one that hears the message of Jonah. What does Jonah mean? Dove. At his baptism, the Holy Spirit comes down in the shape of the dove, in the form of a dove. Peter saw it. He knew it. He gets to respond to this. "For flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say unto thee that thou art Peter. And upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Brothers and sisters, that's the temple of Pan. That's right here in Caesarea Philippi. Do you know that when you do this calculation over here, what is the golden ratio? That it takes a mathematical term to be involved with this. And I'm not going to break because I'm already out of time. Save your questions or comments for afterwards. But
Peter was not the rock. The rock was his confession.
Not a problem with that. Not a problem with that. Amen. But this most of us know, everyone know what pi r squared is? Okay, these trigonometry terms. Okay, there's another one that you have to use to identify this, what's it called? Golden ratio. By the way, this golden ratio, when it works out, it goes right out to 144. And then it continues going. But the ratio that you have to use is called phi, which of course is the root word of Philippi. Caesarea Philippi is where this is taking place. But this is also a mathematical term, term that the mathematicians use, and it's this, 1.618. You got to use this particular, and there's so much to say about this, but you got to use it in connection with this. It's part of the wonderful numbers invention, creation. Okay, now you have to see that. Phi is the root word for Philippi. We're in Caesarea Philippi. We're in Paneum. We're dealing with the wonderful number and this statement in what verse is it? Verse 18. "And I say unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Where do we find that? Matthew 16:18, brothers and sisters. The wonderful number is working here. He's telling us a story about the church triumphant that's just about to be established on planet Earth. And he's saying, Upon this rock, Peter, upon this rock. Okay, Peter. What letter in the alphabet is P? It's 16. What letter is R? 18. What letter is 5? I said 5. I gave it away. Well, it's E would have been the right answer. Okay. What number is T? Did you know that if you multiply 16 times 5 times 20 times 5 times 18, you equal 144,000? The wonderful numbers in this story in Caesarea Philippi and Matthew 16 is taking place right here, typifying the raising up of the church triumphant at this battle. The battle where the United States retaliates against Russia and the dictatorship of this country begins. The return to slavery begins. And the troublous times that we've been talking about for years begins, and we're right on the threshold of it. And when this kind of light is opening up within this movement, there is an effort to move the waymarks that would allow us to see how close we are to the end of the world. So this may be one of the few remaining Sabbaths that we can come together with this kind of ease and peace in considering these type of things. Because midnight's approaching. And based upon God's word, those of us that are faithful are about to be rounded up and arrested. So, if you don't mind, I'd like to open. I got a Freudian slip from Brother Dwayne. He asked me, are you going to close the Sabbath tonight? And I thought, well, I'd be talking for 24 hours if I did so, but I just repeated his Freudian slip. Where are the Jamaican sisters? They must be, they're with the children. I was going to pull them into a special music, but I won't do it. We'll have a closing prayer. Can you do a solo, my sister? All right. Heavenly Father, we thank you for being here throughout these days as we've been trying to address the first 39 verses of Daniel 11 in the context of being the fulfillment of the midnight cry message in our history. We know that there are still elements that have to be unfolded to us, but we can see that you are repeating the history that's typified by the work of Samuel Snow. And we want to be benefited by that work. We want to be warned by that work. And we want the Holy Spirit to convict us of our need of personal preparation, that we might be able and fit tools in your hands to warn others. We ask that the time we're spending here these days would contribute to that work. And now that the Sabbath hours have arrived, we ask that you would bless us more abundantly than you have in these previous days, that in agreement with the literal rain that you're dumping down here at this time, that you would pour the latter rain out upon us throughout these sacred hours. As we break here this evening, we ask that you would keep us in conscious memory that it is the sacred hours, that we keep our conversation, our thoughts appropriate to these times. We ask that you bring us back here safely tomorrow, that we might continue on in our studies. And we thank you for blessing us through this encampment so far. In Jesus' name, amen.